June Woodson's hands trembled as she lowered her sister's wedding photograph onto the mantel, the memory of Abigail's bright smile now forever preserved behind dusty glass. At 21, June never imagined she would be forced to take her sister's place as wife to a man she barely knew, a man who had loved another woman entirely. The year was 1878, and Fort McDowell, Arizona Territory, had little mercy for unmarried women with no means of support. The small settlement nestled in the Sonoran Desert had grown around the military outpost established years earlier. But even with its growth, opportunities for a woman alone remained scarce. "You'll be marrying Elias by week's end," her father announced that morning, his voice leaving no room for discussion as he paced their modest home. "The arrangement has been made." 3 months had passed since Abigail's death in childbirth. The baby, a tiny boy, had followed his mother hours later. Elias Thompson had buried his wife and son together beneath a cottonwood tree on the edge of his property, marking their graves with a carved wooden cross. Now, it seemed June was expected to step into the empty space left behind. "Father, I cannot," June protested, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elias does not want me any more than I want him." "What you want matters little," Walter Woodson replied, his weathered face hardening. "You're a burden I can no longer afford. Elias needs a wife to manage his home, and you need a husband to provide. The match is practical." June knew the truth behind her father's words. Since her mother's passing 5 years ago, he'd grown increasingly distant, finding solace in whiskey and gambling tables. The small ranch they once tended together had dwindled to nearly nothing. She was the last possession he had left to trade. Abigail loved him, her father added, as though this somehow settled the matter. Abigail loved a man who courted her with poetry and promises, June countered. "Elias has spoken scarcely 10 words to me since her funeral." Her father's hand came down hard against the table. "This isn't about love, girl. It's about survival." The following days passed in a blur of preparations. The black mourning dress June had worn for her sister was deemed appropriate for a wedding that would take place without celebration. Elias had agreed to the arrangement with the same emotionless practicality her father had displayed, finalizing details as though acquiring property rather than a wife. On the morning of her wedding, June stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, pinning her honey-brown hair into a severe knot at the nape of her neck. Her reflection showed a woman she barely recognized, hazel eyes dulled by resignation, cheeks hollow from months of grief, lips pressed thin in determination to survive what was to come. The ceremony was brief, conducted in the parlor of their home with only her father, the minister, and 2 hastily summoned witnesses in attendance. June felt Elias's hands cold against hers as they exchanged vows, his eyes focused somewhere beyond her shoulder. He was not an unattractive man, tall and solidly built with dark hair and a closely trimmed beard, but his features remained impassive throughout, as though carved from stone. That evening, June arrived at what would now be her home, a modest but well-maintained ranch house on 30 acres of grazing land just outside town. Elias carried her small trunk inside, setting it at the foot of the bed he had once shared with her sister. "I'll sleep in the spare room," he stated simply, the first words he'd spoken since their vows. "You'll find everything you need for housekeeping. I rise before dawn and expect breakfast ready." June nodded, relief washing through her at the realization he would not claim his husbandly rights, not tonight, perhaps not ever. As he turned to leave, she gathered her courage. "I am sorry for your loss, Elias, truly." He paused in the doorway, shoulders stiffening. "As am I for yours." Then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him, In the days that followed, June settled into a routine of domestic duties. She cooked meals that Elias ate in silence, washed linens they kept separate, and tended a small vegetable garden in Abigail's place. They existed in the same space without truly acknowledging one another. Two people bound by law but divided by the ghost between them. June wrote to her father once, receiving no reply. She learned from town gossip that Walter Woodson had sold what remained of their ranch and departed for California, leaving no forwarding address. The knowledge stung less than she expected in truth. She had lost her father long before he physically abandoned her. The summer heat baked the landscape to a golden brown, dust rising with each step as June made her weekly journey into town for supplies. Fort McDowell's Main Street consisted of little more than a general store, saloon, small bank, and a handful of other establishments catering to the needs of ranchers and soldiers from the nearby military post. June had come to appreciate the brief respite these errands provided from the stifling silence of her marriage. Mrs. Thompson, Samuel Green, the storekeeper, greeted her with the same uncomfortable smile he'd worn since her wedding day. Everyone in town knew the circumstances of her marriage. How could they not in a place where news traveled faster than dust storms? Mr. Green, June acknowledged, handing him her list of supplies. As he gathered her items, the store's bell jingled, announcing another customer. June kept her eyes on the penny candy display, having grown accustomed to avoiding unnecessary conversation. "Afternoon," a deep voice drawled behind her, unfamiliar in its warmth. Despite herself, June turned. The man who stood in the doorway removed his hat with a fluid motion, revealing sun-streaked brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. His face, bronzed from outdoor living, bore several days' growth of beard, yet there was something immediately arresting in his clear blue eyes and the easy confidence with which he carried himself. "Mr. Nash," the storekeeper called out, "didn't expect to see you back so soon. Thought you'd be on the trail to Texas by now." "Change of plans," the stranger replied, his gaze briefly meeting June's before he moved further into the store. "Decided to winter here. Cattle prices are better if I wait till spring." June returned her attention to her shopping list, though she remained acutely aware of the man's presence as he moved about the store. There was something in his manner, a freedom of movement and speech that contrasted sharply with the restrained existence she'd come to accept. When it came time to pay, June realized with embarrassment that she'd miscalculated her purchases. "I'm afraid I'll need to return the coffee," she told Mr. Green, heat rising to her cheeks. "Put it on my account," the stranger Nash said from nearby, placing his own items on the counter. "That's not necessary," June protested, discomfited by the offer. "Consider it a welcome to the community," he replied with a slight smile. "Don't believe we've met. Noah Zander." "June Thompson," she answered, the name still foreign on her tongue after 3 months of marriage. "And I'm hardly new to Fort McDowell." Something in her tone must have betrayed her circumstances, for his expression shifted subtly. "Then consider it neighborly. Either way, keep your coffee." Before June could argue further, Mr. Green had already added the item to Noah's purchases. With reluctant gratitude, she gathered her supplies and nodded a brief thanks before hurrying from the store. She was halfway down the street when she heard footsteps approaching from behind. "Mrs. Thompson," Noah called, "let me help you with those." June paused, clutching her parcels. "Thank you, Mr. Zander, but I manage fine on my own." "No doubt," he agreed easily, falling into step beside her. "But a gentleman offers assistance regardless." There was something disarming about his persistence, lacking the pity she'd grown accustomed to seeing in others' eyes. After a moment's hesitation, she allowed him to take the heavier packages. "You have property near Fort McDowell?" she asked, maintaining a proper distance as they walked. "Bought the old Jenkins place last spring," he replied. "Been making improvements when I'm not moving cattle." "It's good grazing land." June nodded. The Jenkins ranch bordered Elias's property to the north, separated by a creek that ran strong in spring but dwindled to nearly nothing during the summer months. "So we're neighbors of sorts," Noah observed. "Though I haven't had the pleasure of meeting your husband." "Elias keeps to himself," June said simply, unwilling to elaborate on the complicated nature of her marriage to this stranger, regardless of how easily he inspired conversation. They reached the hitching post where her wagon waited. Noah placed her packages carefully in the back, then offered his hand to help her climb to the seat. His fingers were warm and calloused against hers, a working man's hands, but with a gentleness that caught her by surprise. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Zander," June said formally, gathering the reins. "Noah," he corrected with a smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "And you're welcome, Mrs. Thompson." As June drove away, she found herself glancing back to where Noah still stood, watching her departure. The brief interaction had left her oddly unsettled, reminding her of how little human connection existed in her daily life. She pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the road ahead and the tasks awaiting her at home. Elias noticed the coffee that evening as he sat at the dinner table. "I don't recall providing money for such luxuries," he commented, the closest he'd come to conversation in days. "It was on sale," June lied, the words coming easier than expected. "I thought you might appreciate it." He studied her briefly, then returned to his meal without further comment. June wondered what he might say if he knew a stranger had purchased it, if he would care at all about another man's kindness toward his wife. The thought brought a bitter taste to her mouth. That night, as she lay awake listening to the coyotes howling in the distance, June allowed herself to acknowledge the loneliness that had become her constant companion. In marrying Elias, she had gained shelter and security, but lost any hope for the companionship she had once dreamed of finding. Her sister had married for love, despite their father's initial objections. June had married to survive. The following weeks brought the first hint of autumn to the desert, the scorching days giving way to more temperate weather. June found herself looking forward to her trips to town, with an anticipation she tried not to examine too closely. Twice more she encountered Noah Zander, once at the general store, where they exchanged brief pleasantries, and again outside the post office, where he tipped his hat to her with that same easy smile that seemed to reach his eyes. On her fourth trip, as October painted the cottonwoods along the creek with golden leaves, June found Noah leaning against the wall outside the general store, as though waiting for her arrival. "Mrs. Thompson," he greeted, falling into step beside her. "I was hoping to run into you today." June glanced at him sideways, noting the fresh shirt and recently trimmed beard. "Were you now? I've got more produce from my garden than one man can eat," he explained. "Thought you might be interested in trading for some of those pies I hear you make. You've heard about my pies?" June asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Mrs. Hollister at the boarding house mentioned them, said your sister used to bring them to church socials before." He trailed off, clearly realizing he'd stumbled into sensitive territory. "Before she died," June finished for him, her voice steady. "Yes, Abigail was known for her baking. I learned from her." Noah's expression softened. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring up painful memories." "Life in the territory is full of painful memories, Mr. Zander. We all carry them." June pushed open the door to the general store, ending the conversation. As she shopped, however, she found herself considering his offer. Elias provided adequately for necessities, but fresh produce beyond what she could grow in her small garden was a luxury rarely afforded. And there was something appealing about the idea of a fair trade and exchange between equals rather than charity. When she emerged from the store, Noah was waiting, a hopeful expression on his face. "Have you considered my proposal? What exactly are you offering?" June asked, practical despite the small flutter of excitement his attention created. "Tomatoes, squash, some late corn, and the best melons this side of the Gila River," he replied with evident pride. "I was a farmer before I was a cattleman." June considered this. "One pie for a basket of vegetables seems a fair trade." His smile widened. "More than fair. When might I collect this bounty?" "I come to town every Friday," June replied, mentally calculating how she would explain the extra baking to Elias. "Then I'll meet you here next Friday with your produce," Noah confirmed, tipping his hat. "Looking forward to it, Mrs. Thompson." As June drove home, she found herself smiling for what felt like the first time in months. The exchange had been innocent enough, a simple bartering arrangement common among neighbors in the territory. Yet there was something in Noah's manner that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced since before Abigail's death. That evening, as she prepared dinner, June mentioned the arrangement to Elias in an attempt at transparency. "I've agreed to trade pies for vegetables with one of the neighboring ranchers," she said, placing a plate before him. "A Mr. Zander from the old Jenkins place." Elias paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "Zander, the cattle driver," he mentioned, moving cattle, June confirmed, surprised by her husband's interest. "Do you know him, by reputation?" Elias's tone turned dismissive. "He's new to ranching. Bought that land without knowing how difficult it is to work. Probably won't last the year." "His garden seems to be thriving," June observed mildly. Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. "Just be careful with your arrangements, June. Men like that, drifters who suddenly decide to put down roots, they're rarely what they seem." It was the longest conversation they'd had in months, and June noted the warning with a mixture of surprise and irritation. "I'm trading pies for vegetables, Elias, not secrets or affections. See that it stays that way." He returned to his meal, conversation clearly finished. That night, June lay awake longer than usual, turning her husband's words over in her mind. There had been something in his tone, not quite jealousy, but a possessiveness she hadn't expected from a man who could barely look at her across the dinner table. Was it concern for her welfare, or merely a man's natural inclination to guard what belonged to him, regardless of whether he valued it? The next Friday arrived with clear skies and a crispness to the morning air that hinted at the changing season. June had risen earlier than usual to bake 2 pies, 1 apple for the trade, and 1 peach that she left cooling on the kitchen windowsill for Elias. A peace offering of sorts, though she wasn't entirely sure why she felt the need to make one. As her wagon approached town, June spotted Noah immediately, leaning against a hitching post with a large basket at his feet. He straightened at her approach, a smile spreading across his face that made her heart quicken in a way that both alarmed and thrilled her. "Mrs. Thompson," he greeted, helping her down from the wagon with that same gentle strength she remembered. "Right on time." "Mr. Zander," she acknowledged, retrieving the carefully wrapped pie from her basket. As promised. The exchange was made with a certain ceremony that made June smile despite herself. Noah lifted the cloth covering the pie and inhaled appreciatively. "Smells like heaven itself." "Apple," June confirmed, "with a touch of cinnamon and nutmeg." "Then I'm afraid I've gotten the better end of this bargain," Noah declared, gesturing to his basket of produce. though I did include some late blackberries I found growing wild near the creek. Thought they might make a nice addition to your next creation." June examined the basket with genuine delight. The vegetables were beautifully formed and varied far more than she had expected. The blackberries nestled in a small container added a thoughtful touch that stirred something in her chest. "This is very generous," she said, meeting his eyes. "Thank you. My pleasure entirely," Noah replied, his gaze holding hers a moment longer than propriety strictly allowed. "Same time next week," June hesitated, thinking of Elias's warning. "I'm not certain I should make this a regular arrangement." "Because your husband objects?" Noah asked, his perception catching her off guard. "Because kindness often comes with expectations," June replied carefully. Noah's expression grew serious. "Mrs. Thompson, June, I expect nothing beyond the pleasure of your company and perhaps another of your pies. I've been alone on that ranch for months with no one but my horse and cattle for conversation. A friendly face and a fair trade is all I'm seeking." There was such sincerity in his voice that June found herself nodding. "Very well. Next Friday, then." As she completed her errands in town, June found herself glancing occasionally toward the saloon, where Noah had gone to enjoy his pie with a cup of coffee, according to the owner's wife who had witnessed their exchange. The woman's knowing look had made June flush. Though she insisted to herself, there was nothing improper in their arrangement. The ride home seemed shorter than usual, her mind occupied with thoughts of how she might use the blackberries, and whether Elias would notice the abundance of fresh vegetables suddenly appearing in their meals. She decided honesty was the simplest approach. She would tell him the trade continued, because it benefited their household. As she rounded the bend that led to the ranch, June was surprised to see Elias's horse already hitched outside the house. He rarely returned from the fields before dusk, especially during the busy harvest season. A flicker of apprehension passed through her as she pulled the wagon to a stop. Elias emerged from the house before she could climb down, his expression tense. "You're late." "I had errands in town," June replied, gathering her purchases. "As I do every Friday." He stepped closer, eyeing the basket of produce. "And is this part of your arrangement with Zander?" "It is," June confirmed, meeting his gaze steadily. "I left you a peach pie on the windowsill." "I assume that's what brought you home early." Something in Elias's posture relaxed marginally. "It was unexpected, as is your concern about my whereabouts," June observed, moving past him toward the house. "In the 6 months we've been married, you've never once asked how I spend my time in town." Elias followed her inside, watching as she began unpacking the vegetables. 6 months, he repeated. "Abigail hasn't been gone but 9. The word struck June like a physical blow. Of course that explained his unusual attention today. The approaching anniversary of her sister's death would naturally be weighing on him. "I miss her too," June said softly, placing the blackberries on the table. "Every day." Elias's jaw tightened. "You didn't know her like I did." "No," June agreed, a flash of anger rising through her grief. "Nor do you know me, though I wear your ring and bear your name." For a moment they stood in tense silence, the truth of their arrangement hanging between them. Then Elias turned away, reaching for his hat. "I'll be late for supper." "Don't wait." As the door closed behind him, June sank into a kitchen chair, the excitement of her meeting with Noah fading beneath the weight of reality. Whatever her feelings, and she wasn't prepared to examine them too closely, she was a married woman. Her sister's widow might treat her with cold indifference, but she had made vows she could not easily set aside. Yet as she prepared dinner that evening, using Noah's vegetables to create a stew Elias would likely eat alone, June found herself wondering what life might have been if circumstances had been different, if she had met Noah Zander before being forced into a marriage of convenience with a man who loved her sister's ghost. The following weeks established a pattern. Each Friday, June would meet Noah in town to exchange pies for produce. Their conversations grew longer, moving beyond pleasantries to deeper discussions about books they had read, places they had seen, and dreams they still harbored. Noah spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his years driving cattle across the territories, and his decision to settle in Arizona after falling in love with its rugged beauty. "There's a freedom here," he told her one crisp November morning as they walked from the general store to her wagon. "A sense that a person can reinvent themselves, become who they truly want to be rather than who circumstances have forced them to be." The words resonated with June more deeply than she cared to admit. "Some circumstances can't be escaped so easily," she replied, thinking of the ring she twisted absently on her finger. Noah's expression grew thoughtful. "People in town talk, about your marriage." June stiffened. "People in town should mind their own affairs." "I'm not judging," he assured her quickly. "Only, I want you to know that I understand your situation better than you might think." "You understand nothing about my situation," June responded, more sharply than intended. Noah fell silent, respecting her rebuke. When they reached her wagon, he helped her up as usual, but his hand lingered on hers a moment longer. "If you ever need a friend, June, just a friend, you know where to find me." The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She withdrew her hand and gathered the reins. "Thank you for the vegetables, Mr. Zander." As winter descended on the territory, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain that transformed the desert briefly into a palette of subtle greens, June found her thoughts turning more often to Noah. Their Friday meetings continued, though the garden's bounty had diminished with the season, replaced by preserved goods and occasional game from his hunting trips. At home, her relationship with Elias remained unchanged, polite but distant, two people sharing space without sharing lives. He never asked about her meetings with Noah, though she suspected he knew they continued. Occasionally, she would catch him watching her with an unreadable expression, but he never voiced whatever thoughts troubled him. As Christmas approached, Fort McDowell prepared for its annual celebration, the small community gathering in the town square to decorate a juniper tree with homemade ornaments and strings of dried berries. June attended the event alone, Elias having declined with his customary silence. She was hanging a small paper star when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Beautiful work." June turned to find Noah watching her, his eyes reflecting the warm light of the lanterns hung around the square. "Thank you. My sister taught me to make them." "She must have been talented," he observed gently. "Like you." The compliment brought a flush to June's cheeks. Abigail was far more accomplished. She could play piano, embroider delicate patterns, charm everyone she met. June trailed off, realizing she had revealed more than intended. "And yet here you are, carrying on her traditions," Noah noted. "Creating beauty in your own way." Before June could respond, Mrs. Hollister from the boarding house approached, her expression brightening at the sight of them together. "June, dear, and Mr. Zander. How lovely to see you both at our little celebration." "Mrs. Hollister," June acknowledged, grateful for the interruption. "I was just telling the committee how wonderful it would be if you might provide some of your pies for the Christmas supper," the older woman continued. "And perhaps Mr. Zander could assist with setting up the tables in the church hall." "I'd be happy to help," Noah agreed readily. June hesitated, considering what Elias might say about such an arrangement. "I'll need to check with my husband, but I'm sure I could manage a few pies." "Wonderful." Mrs. Hollister beamed. The two of you make such a fine pair of volunteers, I mean, she added with a wink that made June's embarrassment deepen. As the woman moved away to recruit other helpers, Noah leaned closer to June. You don't have to participate if it makes things difficult at home. No, June decided suddenly. I'd like to contribute. Abigail always did, and it feels right to continue that tradition. Noah's smile warmed her despite the December chill. Then I look forward to working alongside you, Mrs. Thompson. The exchange left June feeling both elated and troubled. There was no denying the growing connection between them, a friendship that increasingly threatened to become something more, at least in her heart. Yet she remained bound to Elias by law and duty, if not by love. When she returned home that evening, June was surprised to find Elias still awake, seated in the parlor with a book open on his lap. He looked up as she entered, his expression unusually alert. The tree lighting was lovely, June offered, removing her shawl. You might have enjoyed it. Christmas was Abigail's favorite, he replied, his voice distant. She decorated every corner of this house. June nodded, remembering how her sister had loved the holiday. The town committee has asked me to bake pies for the Christmas supper. I thought I would honor her memory by participating. Elias closed his book. You're not Abigail. The simple statement carried a weight that made June's chest tighten. No, I'm not. I've never pretended to be. Haven't you? His gaze was penetrating now, taking her place in this house in the community. Meeting with another man while wearing my ring, June stiffened. My arrangement with Mr. Zander is entirely proper. We meet in public in full view of the town. You think I don't see how you've changed these past months? Elias demanded, rising from his chair. How you hum while you work, how you take extra care with your appearance before going to town each Friday. Would you prefer I remain in perpetual mourning? June countered, her own anger rising. That I wither away in this house as you seem content to do? I prefer honesty, Elias replied. If you wish to end our arrangement, June interrupted with a bitter laugh. Is that what you call this marriage? An arrangement forced upon us both by a father who abandoned me the moment the vows were spoken. Elias fell silent, the truth of her words hanging between them. Finally he spoke, his voice lower. I have not been a true husband to you. Nor have I asked you to be, June replied, the fight draining from her. We both know why we married, Elias, but we cannot continue living as strangers beneath the same roof. What would you have me do? He asked, and for the first time since their wedding day, June saw genuine uncertainty in his expression. I don't know, she admitted, but something must change. He nodded slowly, then moved past her toward his bedroom. Bake your pies for the supper, I'll accompany you. The statement, delivered without emotion, nonetheless represented a significant shift. June watched him go, wondering what this development might mean for their future and for her increasingly complicated feelings toward Noah Zander. The days leading up to Christmas brought a flurry of activity as June prepared her contributions for the town celebration. Elias remained true to his word, assisting her by bringing in extra firewood for the oven and even offering to drive her to town on the day of the supper. His efforts at engagement, though awkward, represented the first real attempt at establishing a genuine partnership between them. As they entered the decorated church hall on Christmas Eve, June was immediately swept into the busy preparations. Women bustled about arranging food on long tables while men positioned benches and hung additional decorations. She spotted Noah across the room, helping to string garlands of pine along the rafters. Their eyes met briefly before Elias's hand at her elbow guided her toward the dessert table. Your pies look wonderful, Mrs. Thompson, Reverend Michaels commented as she arranged them alongside other confections. We've missed your family's contributions these past months. "Thank you, Reverend," June replied, aware of Elias standing stiffly beside her. "It feels good to participate again." The celebration began as twilight descended, lanterns illuminating the hall as the community gathered to share food and fellowship. June found herself watching Elias as he engaged in stilted conversation with neighboring ranchers' attempts at normalcy that seemed to require tremendous effort on his part. His discomfort was evident, yet he stayed, honoring his promise to accompany her. When it came time for dancing, however, Elias retreated to a corner, leaving June seated alone as couples took to the cleared space in the center of the hall. She was observing the festivities with forced cheerfulness when Noah appeared before her, hand extended. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Thompson?" he asked, conscious of the eyes that had turned toward them. June hesitated, glancing toward Elias, who watched from across the room with an unreadable expression. Propriety dictated that she should decline without her husband's clear approval. Yet something in Noah's steady gaze, respect mingled with hope, made her reach for his hand. "One dance," she agreed softly. As Noah led her to the floor, June felt the weight of the town's attention. The musicians had struck up a simple waltz, and Noah's hand settled respectfully at her waist as they began to move with the music. "People are watching," June murmured, keeping a proper distance between them. "Let them," Noah replied, his voice for her alone. "We're doing nothing wrong." Yet as they turned about the floor, June couldn't help feeling that this simple act, this public acknowledgement of their connection, crossed a boundary she had been carefully maintaining. Noah's hand was warm through the fabric of her dress, his movements confident as he guided her through the steps. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she might dance with this man without concern for appearances or obligations. The music ended too soon, and Noah returned her to her seat with a respectful bow. "Thank you for the dance, Mrs. Thompson." Before June could respond, Elias appeared at her side, his expression tight. "We should be going." "The celebration has barely begun," June protested quietly. Nevertheless, his tone left no room for argument. The ride home passed in uncomfortable silence, the festive atmosphere of town giving way to the tension that filled their wagon. It wasn't until they reached the ranch that Elias finally spoke. "You care for him." It wasn't a question, and June saw no point in denying the obvious. "I enjoy his company." "And he yours," Elias observed, helping her down from the wagon with none of the gentleness Noah always showed. The entire town could see it tonight. June squared her shoulders. "I have honored our vows, Elias. I have been a dutiful wife in all respects save one which you yourself have never sought." His jaw tightened at her reference to their unconsummated marriage. "And if I were to seek it now, would you come to my bed while thinking of him?" The cruel question stunned June into silence. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled with suppressed emotion. "I would honor my obligation as your wife, but we both know your heart lies in the ground beside my sister." Elias turned away, his shoulders sagging suddenly. "As does any chance of happiness for either of us, it seems." The defeat in his voice stirred an unexpected pity in June. "It doesn't have to be that way, Elias. Perhaps if we tried, to what end?" he interrupted. "To force affection where none exists, to pretend we don't both wish for something else entirely." His honesty, however painful, created an opening for truth between them. June took a deep breath. "What do you wish for, Elias? Truly?" He was quiet for so long that June thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice had softened. "Peace. Freedom from this grief that follows me like a shadow. And for you a chance at the happiness Abigail found, however briefly." The admission hung in the air between them, profound in its simplicity. June reached out, touching his arm gently. I wish those things for you as well. They entered the house together, a new understanding forming between them, not love, but perhaps the beginnings of genuine compassion. That night, June lay awake long after Elias had retired to his separate room, considering the possibility that their arrangement might evolve into something different than either had anticipated. The weeks following Christmas brought change to Fort McDowell. January arrived with unusual cold, a light dusting of snow transforming the desert landscape. June continued her Friday meetings with Noah, though now they often took place in the warmth of the general store rather than outside in the winter air. Their conversations remained proper, yet each exchange deepened the connection between them, a connection June could no longer deny, even to herself. At home, her relationship with Elias had shifted into something resembling friendship. They spoke more openly during meals, sharing observations about the ranch and occasionally memories of Abigail that brought bittersweet smiles rather than pain. He remained reserved, but the wall between them had begun to crumble, revealing a man struggling to move forward from devastating loss. It was during one such conversation in early February that Elias surprised her with a question. "Do you love him?" June's hand stilled over the bread dough she was kneading. "I don't know what you mean." "Zander," Elias clarified, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "Do you love him?" The directness of the question deserved an honest answer. "I care for him deeply. Whether that's love, I cannot say." Elias nodded slowly, as though her response confirmed something he had long suspected. "And if you were free to pursue those feelings?" June's heart began to race. "Elias, what are you suggesting?" "An end to our arrangement," he replied simply. "A dissolution of our marriage." The possibility was so unexpected that June struggled to process it. "Divorce. The scandal would—" "There are other options," Elias interrupted. "Annulment, perhaps, given the incomplete nature of our union." June felt heat rise to her cheeks at his reference to their unconsummated marriage. "Why would you do this?" "Because neither of us is living, June," he answered, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "We're existing in the shadow of Abigail's memory. Perhaps it's time we both stepped into the light." "The town would talk," June said, though the objection felt hollow even to her own ears. "The town already talks," Elias countered with a hint of dark humor. "Let them talk about something new for a change." As the possibility took shape in June's mind, another thought occurred to her. "What about you? What would you do?" Elias was quiet for a moment. "I've been corresponding with my brother in California. He's offered me a partnership in his business there, a fresh start away from memories." "You'd leave the ranch?" June asked, surprised by this revelation. "I'd sell it," Elias confirmed. "Split the proceeds fairly with you enough to provide you a new beginning as well, whether with Zander or on your own terms." The generosity of the offer left June speechless. After months of feeling trapped, the sudden prospect of freedom was overwhelming. "I need time to think," she managed finally. "Take all the time you need," Elias replied, rising from the table. "But know that the offer stands, for both our sakes." That night, June barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and uncertainties. By morning, she had reached no clear decision, though the seed Elias had planted continued to grow. Freedom, true freedom to choose her own path, was now within reach. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Friday arrived with clear skies and a warming trend that hinted at the approach of spring. June drove to town with an unusual sense of anticipation, knowing her meeting with Noah held new significance given Elias's proposal. She found him waiting in their usual spot, his face brightening at her approach. "I was beginning to think you might not come," Noah said as he helped her down from the wagon. The roads were muddy from yesterday's rain, June explained, though in truth she had delayed her departure, gathering courage for the conversation she knew they must have. They exchanged their customary items, a cherry pie for a selection of preserved vegetables and dried meat, but the easy banter that usually accompanied their trade was absent. Noah seemed to sense her preoccupation. "Is everything all right, June?" he asked as they walked toward the general store. "I'm not certain," she admitted. "Things at home have become complicated." Concern immediately shadowed his features. "Has Thompson mistreated you?" "No, nothing like that," June assured him quickly. "In fact, quite the opposite. He's offered me a choice I never expected to have." Noah's expression shifted from concern to confusion. "What kind of choice?" June glanced around at the busy street, aware this was no place for such a conversation. "Could we speak somewhere more private?" Without hesitation, Noah guided her toward the church, which stood empty on the Friday afternoon. Inside, the quiet sanctuary offered refuge from curious eyes and ears. They sat in a back pew, a respectful distance between them despite the privacy. "Elias has offered to end our marriage," June stated plainly once they were settled. "An annulment given certain circumstances." Noah's eyes widened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "He plans to move to California to start fresh. He would sell the ranch and divide the proceeds." June twisted her hands in her lap. "I would be free to pursue another path." "With me?" Noah asked softly, the question hanging in the air between them. June met his gaze directly. "That depends on whether such a path exists." For a moment, Noah seemed at a loss for words. Then he reached for her hand, covering it gently with his own. "June, from the moment I met you, I've felt a connection I can't explain. I've respected your marriage, kept a proper distance, but I can't deny that my feelings run deeper than friendship." The admission, so simply stated, brought tears to June's eyes. "As do mine." "Then yes," Noah continued, his voice gaining strength. "There is a path forward together if that's what you choose. My ranch isn't much compared to Thompson's, but it's growing. We could build something there, something that belongs to both of us." The future he described was everything June had privately longed for: a true partnership based on mutual affection rather than obligation. Yet doubt still lingered. What if people think poorly of us? A woman who leaves one man for another. "People will always talk," Noah replied, echoing Elias's words from days earlier. "But they'll forget eventually, especially when they see we've built something genuine and lasting." His confidence was reassuring, but June needed more than words. "I need to know you understand what you're offering, Noah. I come with complications of failed marriage, no family connections, little beyond what Elias has offered as settlement." "I'm offering my heart, June," Noah said simply. "Everything else we can figure out together." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her, a place that had begun to believe happiness might be possible again. Still, she couldn't rush such an important decision. "I need to speak with Elias again, to be certain this is truly what he wants. And I need time to consider all it would mean." "Of course," Noah agreed immediately. "Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere." As they left the church, Noah maintained a respectful distance, though the understanding between them had fundamentally changed. June felt lighter somehow, as though the mere possibility of choice had lifted a weight she'd carried since her father first announced her impending marriage to Elias. The journey home gave June time to order her thoughts. By the time she arrived at the ranch, she had decided to accept Elias's offer not primarily for the chance to be with Noah, though that prospect filled her with joy, but because both she and Elias deserved the opportunity to seek genuine happiness rather than mere accommodation. She found him in the barn, mending a broken bridle by lantern light. He looked up as she entered, his expression questioning. "I've considered your proposal," June began without preamble. "I believe it may be best for both of us." Elias nodded slowly, setting aside his work. "You've spoken with Zander." "I have," she admitted, seeing no reason for pretense between them now. "But my decision isn't solely about him. It's about what this past year has taught me, that life is too precious to spend in half measures." A ghost of a smile crossed Elias's features. Abigail would have said the same. She never did anything by halves. The mention of her sister brought unexpected tears to June's eyes. "She would want us both to find peace, wouldn't she?" "Yes," Elias agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "She would." In that moment of shared grief and understanding, June felt a genuine connection with the man who had been her husband in name only. "Thank you, Elias, for this gift of freedom." He shook his head slightly. "It's as much for me as for you, perhaps more so." The arrangements proceeded with surprising simplicity. Elias contacted a lawyer in Phoenix who specialized in such matters, explaining their situation with discreet honesty. Given the unconsummated nature of their union and their mutual consent, the annulment was granted with minimal difficulty. The ranch sold quickly to a cattle company expanding its holdings in the territory, providing both June and Elias with substantial settlements. Throughout the process, June continued her Friday meetings with Noah, though they maintained a careful propriety that respected her still married status. Their conversations turned increasingly toward the future improvements to his ranch, the possibility of expanding his cattle herd, dreams of creating a home together once she was legally free. Fort McDowell buzzed with gossip as news of the impending annulment spread, but June found herself less concerned with the town's opinion than she had anticipated. The truth of her marriage to Elias had always been known to some degree. Its ending seemed a natural conclusion rather than a shocking development. On the day the final papers arrived, June stood with Elias in the home they had shared for nearly a year, surrounded by packed trunks and crates. His stage to California would depart the following morning. "Are you certain about this?" she asked, studying the face that had become familiar, if never truly beloved. "More certain than I was about marrying you," he replied with unexpected candor. "Though I hope you know I've come to respect you greatly, June." "As I have you," she answered truthfully. "I wish you happiness in California, Elias." He nodded, then reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "Before I go, Abigail would want you to have this." June unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver locket. Opening it, she found a tiny portrait of her sister, smiling as she remembered her. "Elias, I can't, please," he interrupted. "Let her watch over you in your new life as she's watched over me." The gesture, so unexpected and touching, broke through June's careful composure. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she closed her hand around the locket. "Thank you." Elias surprised her further by stepping forward to place an awkward kiss on her forehead, the first and only such gesture in their entire marriage. "Be happy, June, truly happy." The following day, June watched his stage depart from Fort McDowell, a strange mixture of sadness and liberation washing over her. One chapter of her life was ending. Another waited to begin. Noah found her there, standing in the dusty street long after the stage had disappeared from view. Without words, he offered his arm, which she accepted with a small smile. Together they walked through town, past curious glances and whispered comments, toward the future they had chosen to build together. Spring came early that year, painting the desert with wildflowers and fresh growth. June moved to Noah's ranch with little fanfare, bringing her few possessions and the settlement from Elias that would help expand their operations. They were married by Reverend Michaels in a simple ceremony attended by the handful of neighbors who had supported their unconventional path. As June stood beside Noah, speaking vows that came from her heart rather than obligation, she felt her sister's presence not as a ghost haunting her happiness, but as a blessing upon it. The locket Elias had given her hung around her neck, a reminder that love in all its complex forms had brought her to this moment. "I take you, Noah Zander, as my husband," she promised, her voice steady and sure. "To build a life of our choosing, to face whatever comes together, to love freely and completely for all our days." His answering smile was everything she had come to cherish, warm, sincere, filled with promise. "And I take you, June Woodson, as my wife." No longer bound by circumstance or obligation, but joined by choice and love. Their first year together brought challenges as they worked to expand the ranch, but also deep joy in the partnership they formed. Noah's steady confidence complemented June's practical determination. Together they transformed the modest homestead into a thriving operation. In their second spring, as new calves filled the pastures and fruit trees blossomed near the house Noah had expanded for their growing family, June felt life quickening within her. The news of her pregnancy brought a celebration, unlike any the ranch had seen. Noah lifting her into his arms and spinning her beneath the cottonwood trees until they both collapsed in laughter. "A family of our own making," he marveled, his hand gentle against the slight curve of her belly. "Built on choice," June agreed, covering his hand with hers. "The greatest gift we could have received." Their son, Walter Elias Zander, was born as autumn painted the desert gold and crimson. With his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, he became the center of their world, joined 2 years later by a daughter they named Abigail Rose. Occasionally letters arrived from California, where Elias had indeed found a new beginning. His correspondence was friendly but distant, the connection between them transformed into something resembling family ties loosely maintained. June always answered, sharing news of the children and the ranch, including occasional photographs that showed her happiness plainly. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Noah surprised June with a picnic beside the creek that separated their property from what had once been Elias's land. As they watched their children playing nearby, he presented her with a gift, a journal bound in soft leather. "For your stories," he explained as she ran her fingers over the cover. "The ones you tell the children, about the woman who found her voice and her choice in an unexpected place." June smiled, leaning against his shoulder as the setting sun painted the landscape in shades of gold. "I never thought I would be grateful for being forced to marry my sister's husband," she mused. "But without that path, I might never have found you." "Life has strange ways of leading us where we need to go," Noah agreed, his arm strong around her shoulders, "even when the journey seems impossible." As twilight deepened over the desert they both had come to love, June Zander reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from obligation to freedom, from arrangement to love. The locket containing Abigail's portrait still hung around her neck, but it no longer represented loss. Instead, it reminded her daily that happiness could bloom in the most unexpected circumstances, if only one had the courage to choose it.